In the bleak, colorless depths of a Soviet winter, January 1959, 9 students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute began preparing for an expedition into the unforgiving wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains. These weren't ordinary tourists. They were seasoned hikers, skiers, and outdoorsmen. Each of them had completed difficult routes before. Many were on their way to earning the highest possible hiking certification in the Soviet Union, Grade 3. This expedition was to be their final qualification. They called it an ambitious yet achievable adventure, but none of them would return. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student with a sharp mind, calm demeanor, and a reputation for leadership. He had carefully selected his team, 8 others, all students or recent, graduates with experience in winter trekking and high morale. There was Zinaida Kolmogorova, known for her strong will and warm sense of humor, Rustem Slobodin, quiet and thoughtful, with a mind for engineering and poetry, Lyudmila Dubinina, a civil engineering student remembered for her intensity and belief in doing what was right, even when it hurt. There was Yuri Doroshenko, who once fought a bear with nothing but a geologist's hammer. There was Nikolai Thibault Brignol, the son of a French communist émigré, brilliant and reserved. There was Semyon Zolotaryov, older than the others at 38, a mysterious figure who had served in the war, tattooed, private, and oddly secretive. And there were 2 Yuris, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Yudin. The latter would be the only one to survive the story, and only because his sciatica forced him to turn back early in the trip. They departed from Sverdlovsk, modern-day Yekaterinburg, on January 23rd, boarding a train headed north. From there, they transferred to trucks, buses, then sleds, until the last signs of civilization faded. Along the way, they laughed, took photographs, recorded journal entries. They sang songs and joked about the cold. They documented everything: weather conditions, camp routines, group dynamics. What they left behind is not just a record of their route, but a portrait of 9 vibrant young people at ease with the world, confident in their skills, trusting in each other. By January 28th, Yuri Yudin had turned back. His spine flared up again, and though he was reluctant, the group insisted. He shouldn't risk it. He hugged each of them goodbye. As the sleds took him away, he turned back to wave. It would be the last time he would see any of them alive. The remaining 9 pressed on. They entered deeper into the Siberian wilderness, where trees thinned and mountains loomed. They began skiing over frozen rivers and dense taiga, carrying their heavy packs, ski poles, and rolled-up tents. Temperatures dropped below -25 degrees Celsius. Still, they made steady progress. Each night, they pitched camp, prepared meals, and recorded their thoughts. Their journals are filled with personal jokes, philosophical musings, even mild complaints about the cold, but nothing to suggest what was coming. On January 31st, they reached the edge of a wooded valley below the mountains. There, they cached some supplies, extra food, gear, and film, intended to lighten their load before the final ascent to Otorten, the target peak. They planned to retrieve these supplies on the way back. This decision would later become vital for reconstructing their timeline. On February 1st, the group began their final push. The weather had worsened. The wind picked up. A snowstorm rolled in, obscuring the path and pushing them off course. Instead of traversing the planned route through the pass, they ascended the slope of Kholat Shakal, a mountain whose name, in the indigenous Mansi language, translates to Mountain of the Dead. They didn't make it far. As the sun began to set and visibility worsened, they decided to stop and make camp on the slope, rather than retreat into the forested valley below. Perhaps they were simply tired, Or perhaps Dyatlov wanted to practice camping on an exposed slope as part of their certification. It was a risky decision. The slope was steep, the wind fierce. They dug into the snow to level a spot, pitched their tent, and settled in for the night. This was the last moment in which anything made sense. The tent, once a beacon of order and safety against the savage winter outside, became their prison. At some point after nightfall, something went terribly wrong. The precise moment is lost to history, but the consequences were absolute. From what investigators could reconstruct, it began suddenly and with terror. The inside of the tent was slashed with knives from the inside out. They hadn't bothered to untie the flap. They didn't crawl out calmly. They escaped like people under attack, cutting their way through synthetic fabric with desperate urgency. They ran into the storm, into the dark, into the sub-zero air with barely any clothing. Some wore only socks, some were barefoot. A few had jackets hastily thrown over thin layers. None were prepared for long exposure to the cold. The temperature had plummeted to nearly 30 degrees C, and the wind made it even worse. Footprints were found the next day, preserved in the snow. They were light, irregular, weaving. Some were barefoot, others wore only one boot. The prints led downhill, toward the tree line, where the dark mass of forest might offer protection. There was no sign of a struggle, no signs of enemies, only the scattered path of people fleeing something in pure panic. At the edge of the forest, beneath a massive cedar tree, searchers later found the remains of a small fire. 2 bodies were there, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Both were barefoot, dressed in only underwear and light shirts. Their hands were burned, perhaps from trying to keep the fire going or from crawling into it in desperation. Nearby branches had been broken several meters up. Investigators believed they had climbed the tree, perhaps to spot the tent above or to escape something on the ground. One of them had torn skin beneath his fingernails, embedded with bark. Not far away, sprawled in the snow, were 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. They were positioned between the cedar and the original campsite, as if they had been trying to return to the tent. They were found at varying distances, hundreds of meters apart. All of them had fallen face down in the snow. All had died of hypothermia. Rustem had a fractured skull, but no obvious external injuries. He may have suffered the blow before death, or collapsed from exhaustion. Igor's fists were clenched, his jaw tight, as if he had resisted until his last breath. Zina had bruises on her body, her lips blue and swollen. None of them made it back. It would take 2 more months for the remaining 4 to be found. In May, as the snow melted and runoff cut through the ravine beneath the cedar tree, searchers finally located a shallow depression in the terrain. There, half buried in running water and snow, lay the other members of the group: Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibaut Brignol. What they found disturbed even the most hardened of the search team. Thibaut Brignol had suffered a massive skull fracture. The force was so severe it would have rendered him unconscious instantly, if not killed him outright. Zolotaryov and Dubinina had crushed ribs, the kind of damage typically seen in high-speed car crashes. Yet their skin showed no bruising, no wounds to match the trauma inside. There were no external injuries that could explain the internal destruction. The force had come from within. Lyudmila's injuries were the most haunting. Her ribs were shattered, and her tongue was missing, not cut, not bitten, but gone. Some claimed it was torn out. Her eyes were also missing, as were Zolotaryov's. Eyeballs vanished. Tissue eaten or removed. Some of the bodies were wearing the clothes of the others, suggesting that those who died first gave their clothing to the others in an act of desperation, or that the garments were stripped after death. Even more chilling, traces of radiation were discovered on Dubinina's and Zolotaryov's clothing. Not high levels, but enough to raise questions. Where had it come from? They hadn't brought any radioactive material. Why would their clothes glow under Geiger? Testing the ravine offered no further answers. There were no animal tracks, no signs of natural collapse, no evidence of enemy attack. And yet the four had died with injuries more consistent with an explosion than exposure. But there was no explosion. There were no burns, no blast crater, no heat. The search team tried to build a coherent timeline. First, the panic inside the tent, then the flight to the cedar, the fire, the cold, the deaths in stages. But the full picture resisted clarity. Why had they fled at all? Why would 9 experienced hikers, trained in mountain survival, abandon their only source of warmth in the dead of night during a snowstorm without adequate clothing? What could have terrified them more than freezing to death? The mystery spread. The Soviet state declared the incident a closed case. The official conclusion, an unknown compelling force. No cause, no suspects, no explanation. The files were marked confidential. For years, the area was quietly restricted. The story circulated in whispers, a mountain that killed 9 people in a single night, leaving behind a trail of madness and frozen silence. When the group failed to return as scheduled, no one panicked at first. Delays in the backcountry were common, especially during winter. But by mid-February, concern began to rise. Friends, fellow students, and eventually family members pressed the authorities for action. A search party was formed. At first, it was made up of volunteers, students, teachers, and hikers, but eventually the Soviet military joined. Aircraft began sweeping over the desolate Ural terrain. Ground searchers combed forests, valleys, ravines. Then, on February 26, nearly 4 weeks after the last entry in the hiker's diary, the tent was spotted on the slope of Kholat Shakal. It was partially collapsed, blanketed in snow, silent, and empty. The searchers who approached the scene were immediately struck by the condition of the tent. It had been sliced open from the inside. The cuts were long, deliberate, erratic. Personal belongings were still inside. Boots, coats, cameras, even food untouched. It was as though the hikers had abandoned everything in a sudden moment of panic and never returned. From there, investigators followed the faint footprints in the snow, leading toward the woods. They found the bodies gradually, first 2, then 3 more, and finally the last 4 months later. Each discovery raised more questions. Each detail contradicted the last. The criminal investigation began immediately. The lead prosecutor, Lev Ivanov, was a seasoned man, but even he admitted later in life that this case unnerved him. The autopsies painted a strange and fragmented picture. Some had clearly died of cold. Their skin showed signs of frostbite, their bodies frozen in defensive postures. But others, like Thibaut Brignol's and Dubinina, had died from massive trauma. Yet there were no bruises, no external markings that aligned with the internal damage. Soviet forensic specialists were at a loss. The reports used vague terminology: severe pressure, massive mechanical force. One doctor even remarked that the injuries resembled those caused by high-speed crashes or extreme pressure changes, not something that should occur on a mountainside. The radiation findings were quietly documented, then redacted in later releases. The bodies and clothing were tested after the families noticed a strange orange tan to the skin during the funerals. Some said the bodies looked sunburned, with hair that had turned grey or reddish. Radiation levels were elevated in only 2 individuals' clothing, but the source was never explained. Then there were the inconsistencies. The timeline was murky. Witnesses were contradictory. Some claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky on the night of February 1st. glowing orbs, silent and hovering, moving at unnatural speeds. Reports surfaced of military testing in the area, parachute mines, rocket experiments, sonic weaponry, but none of it could be proven. And much of it, investigators were warned, should not be explored further. Files were classified, some reports were altered. The press received only carefully edited statements. The official narrative that emerged in May 1959 concluded that the DIDN group had died due to an unknown compelling force which the hikers were not able to overcome. That was it. No avalanche was recorded, no animal attack, no external threat, no suspects. The case was closed. Families were told to move on, but they couldn't, and neither could the people who found the bodies. Rumors spread, whispers of cover-ups, of tests gone wrong, of radiation, of creatures, of madness. The mountain itself became a spectre. Some began calling it cursed. Igor Dyatlov's mother never accepted the explanation. She insisted her son would never have led the group into such danger voluntarily. She said the state knew more than it admitted. She wasn't alone. Other parents felt the same. In the following years, the Dyatlov Pass incident faded into the background, part of a cold, secretive system that did not welcome speculation, but it was never truly forgotten. The files remained sealed for decades. Only in the early 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, were parts of the original investigation made available to the public. By then, the mystery had already taken on a life of its own. As the years passed, the official narrative of an unknown compelling force became a blank canvas for speculation. The Dyatlov Pass incident grew into one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, inspiring countless theories, debates and investigations by amateurs and professionals alike. One of the earliest and simplest explanations was the avalanche theory. It suggested that a small, unexpected avalanche forced the hikers to flee their tent in terror. The tent's torn fabric could be explained as panic-driven escape. The internal injuries, severe chest trauma and skull fractures, might have been caused by snow slabs weighing down on their bodies or by falls into ravines while fleeing. On paper, this theory made sense. Avalanches are common in mountainous areas, especially with unstable snowpacks after storms. However, skeptics pointed out serious problems. The slope where the hikers camped averaged around 23 degrees, below the typical angle for avalanches, which usually require at least 30 degrees. The tent itself showed no signs of being crushed by a massive avalanche. No significant debris or slide debris was found near the site. Furthermore, the injuries were inconsistent with an avalanche. Avalanches tend to cause blunt trauma and fractures on exposed parts of the body, but the Dyatlov victims had internal trauma without matching external wounds. Why would the hikers strip off their clothing or remove their boots in such freezing conditions? And why did some run barefoot into the forest instead of staying together? Another popular theory involved secret military tests. During the late 1950s, the Soviet Union conducted experiments with parachute mines, rockets, and even sonic weaponry. It was rumored that the Dyatlov group might have stumbled upon a test zone exposed to explosions or radiation. The traces of radioactivity found on some clothing lent some credibility to this idea, yet no official records have confirmed such tests near the pass on those dates. Military authorities denied any involvement, and no other eyewitnesses reported explosions or unusual activity. The theory also struggles to explain why no blast damage was found on the tent or surrounding terrain. Then there are the accounts of strange lights in the sky, reported by some witnesses in nearby villages. Eyewitnesses described glowing orbs moving silently and swiftly over the mountains on the night of the incident. Some researchers speculated about UFOs or otherworldly phenomena, suggesting that the hikers may have been frightened by unknown entities. Though captivating, this theory lacks solid evidence. No photographs, radar data, or physical traces support it. The story remains anecdotal, often conflated with folklore and local legends. The Mansi people, indigenous to the region, spoke of almasty, forest spirits or guardians of the mountain. According to their traditions, the mountain was sacred, and disrespect or intrusion might anger these beings. Some have interpreted the hiker's fate as punishment by supernatural forces, a manifestation of local myths. While these tales add cultural depth to the mystery, they don't provide scientific answers. More recently, infrasound has been proposed as a plausible cause of panic. Infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing, can induce feelings of dread, anxiety, nausea, and even hallucinations. Winds blowing over the mountain's unique terrain might have created such sounds, triggering mass hysteria and irrational flight. This explanation aligns with the sudden, panicked escape from the tent. Yet it does not explain the severe injuries or the mutilations. No theory perfectly accounts for all facts. Avalanches cannot explain the injuries, and bizarre behavior fully. Military tests have no confirmed evidence. Paranormal explanations lack physical proof. The mystery remains layered and incomplete. In 2019, new studies combined avalanche modeling with terrain analysis and forensic data. They suggested a delayed slab avalanche triggered by the group's own tent placement. A slab avalanche is a dense, cohesive block of snow that can break loose and slide slowly but powerfully, even on gentler slopes. This might explain the roof collapse, internal trauma, and panic escape. But even this new research leaves questions unanswered. Why the mutilations? Why the loss of tongues and eyes? Why radiation traces? Were there more than natural causes? The Dyatlov Pass remains an unsolved enigma, inviting curiosity and caution alike. The tragedy at Dyatlov Pass didn't just claim 9 lives. It left an indelible mark on the families, the region, and the world. For the families, the loss was unimaginable. They received sparse information from the authorities and were told the case was closed. Many never accepted the official explanations. Mothers and fathers clung to memories, letters, and photographs, seeking any sign of the truth. Some became lifelong advocates for reopening the investigation. Igor Dyatlov's mother, in particular, kept pushing for answers. She refused to believe her son would lead his friends to such a perilous fate without cause. Over the years, she corresponded with officials, researchers, and journalists, hoping to keep the story alive and find clarity. Meanwhile, the incident seeped into Soviet and later Russian culture. Books, documentaries, films, and novels retold the story, mixing fact with speculation. The Dyatlov Pass became a symbol of mystery and the unknowable forces of nature. In recent decades, interest has only grown. Modern hikers and thrill-seekers are drawn to the site, despite, or perhaps because of, the danger and legend. Each year, small groups visit the pass, retracing the route, leaving memorials, and trying to connect with the lost hikers. Some have reported strange sensations, eerie silences, and inexplicable occurrences. Scientific teams, independent researchers, and journalists have repeatedly tried to unlock the case. Advances in forensic science, snow dynamics, and meteorology have allowed new hypotheses to be tested. In 2020, Russian authorities officially reopened the investigation, focusing on natural causes such as an avalanche or katabatic winds, strong, cold downslope gusts known to be capable of disorienting and freezing victims quickly. Yet, even with modern technology, the mountain keeps its secrets. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a stark reminder of human vulnerability when faced with the raw power of nature. It challenges assumptions about safety, survival, and the limits of human endurance. It has become more than a story about 9 hikers. It is a haunting exploration of fear, mystery, and the unknown. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not just the loss of life, but the unanswered questions, the silence left by the snow, the whispers carried on the cold wind, and the shadows that linger on that distant, deadly slope. The story of the Dyatlov Pass remains one of the most chilling mysteries ever recorded. 9 young lives, full of promise and courage, swallowed by the merciless winter, their fate frozen in time and shadowed by unanswered questions. Despite decades of investigation, theories, and speculation, the mountain keeps its secrets locked beneath the snow. As we reflect on their journey, their hope, their fear, and the unknown force that ended their trek, we are reminded of how fragile our existence is against the vast and indifferent wilderness. The Dyatlov Pass is not just a place on a map. It is a symbol of mystery, of humanity's eternal struggle to understand what lies beyond the veil. If you found this story compelling, if the mystery of Dyatlov Pass stirred something in you, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows us to explore more forgotten corners of history together. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay curious and stay safe.